What's up? I'm a sad girl.
Good grief. I'm reaping what I sow.
What Earl Sweatshirt said. In Nanaike Kumu, which was put out by Queen Liliuokalani Children's Center, in this book here, grief is understood as the Hawaiian word kaumaha. Kau meaning to set or place or put something down, and maha meaning relief or rest. So when these two words are put together, kau and maha, grief can be understood as, quote, a heavy weight followed by relief. Connotatively, kaumaha also means sad or heavy as well. At this kind of current moment in my life, I am navigating a lot of kaumaha. I recently left a job that I really loved because my health is declining with kind of very unclear diagnoses. Connections with people that I had been close with are fraying or have been ripped apart, faded away. So a lot of newness because of that. And also the constant fluctuation of my mental health. So basically, I'm sitting at the precipice of a major reset in my life, and I'm needing to reevaluate who I am, who I've been, and who I'm growing into. And there's a lot of pain and sadness in that type of transition. And I know that in order to grow into that next person I'm becoming, I realize that I must my kaumaha and grieve so that I can maha. Through this video, I'm going to be exploring a bunch of different philosophies on grief to kind of inform what I would want to take into my own grieving process. I am definitely by no means an expert in any of these fields of philosophy, psychology, therapy, none of that. But the purpose of this video for me is to put together just these disparate thoughts that I've had and the research that I've been doing to inform my own process and share that with you folks. I'll be exploring ʻike kupuna to ground my practice in Kanaka methodologies while also looking towards Western philosophy to further guide my practice. So hopefully on this journey that I'm endeavoring with this video, you folks find something that resonates with you. In this inaugural chapter, I'm going to be building a definition for grief through the different sources that I turn to and build a definition that is specific to me, not necessarily a definition that can be applied universally. So this is very specific to the grieving process that I'm going through, but still it might be helpful for you as well. I'll be primarily turning to this amazing essay entitled Philosophy of Grief, which was written by Hannah Dworkin, shown here. It's also linked in the bio, so please go read it if you have the chance. I'll only be kind of doing a cursory glance in this video and pulling the big themes that stood out for me, but I highly recommend reading it yourself. It does the work of synthesizing a bunch of the Western canon's philosophy around grief while also offering some contemporary views on the subject as well. In addition to this, I'll be turning to Nanaike Kumu, this puke right here, which, if you know it, you know that Tutu Mary Kavena Pukui was the major contributor of the ʻike in it. And I'll be turning to this book to kind of ground what I'm interacting with within my cultural context as Kanaka Oiwi, as a Native Hawaiian and Mahu person. There's a lot to unpack here. But from these two primary sources, well, not primary, but main sources for this video, I'll be building a definition of grief and also try to pull out some thematic questions that can help guide what a grieving process can look like for myself. To give ourselves a starting point to define grief, I turned to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, just the website, and this is what it says right here. Quote, grief is deep and poignant distress caused by or as if by bereavement. For me, this is a kind of lengthy and sort of confusing wording for defining grief, so I want to make something a little bit more useful. So the way that I kind of processed this definition for myself is shown here. Quote, grief is deep emotional distress caused by loss. To me, bereavement doesn't have to be only reserved for death. I think it can be expanded to be also needing to bereave the loss of friendships, loved ones, just connections in general, and the parts of ourselves that we lose along the way. I believe all those things require bereavement. Now, let's turn to Dworkin's essay. Through their research into Western philosophy, they found that the Western canon actually has a pretty strong stance against grief. One that basically states that grief is an irrational fear response to death or to losing something. In Plato's writing entitled Apology, which covers the time in which Socrates was put to trial for quote-unquote corrupting the youth of Greece with his philosophizing and critiques of Greek culture at that time in history. And he's also charged with execution, or sentenced to execution, rather. Within this work called the Apology, Socrates accepts his guilty verdict and the ensuing death by saying, quote, to fear death, gentlemen, is no other than to think oneself wise when one is not. So essentially, his claim is that because we as mortal beings don't know what death actually is, we have no grounds to fear it. The way that Dworkin kind of synthesizes not just Socrates, but other philosophers' opinions on grief as well, is by saying, quote, grief is not viewed as a valid response to loss, but as a reflection of irrational misconceptions surrounding topics of death and personal identity. So, yeah, that's kind of bleak and cold, and I don't really fully vibe. I do agree with Socrates to an extent, right? Like, we don't know what comes after death definitively, right? Like, within our own spiritual or religious or cultural practices, we have concepts and ideas that we interact with, and I also interact with my own spiritual practices as well. But in terms of like a definitive, we know what happens, we don't. And we shouldn't allow that unknowability to sway the way that we live our lives. But shouldn't we deepen our knowledge of self through experiencing the fullness of the emotions that come from loss? Instead of just like shutting down those emotions, let's question their origins and see where that leads us. Because it usually leads us towards those parts of ourselves that we don't interact with or confront that kind of need to be interacted with and confronted. And kind of sift through those things, evaluate them, and offer some solace, offer some understanding, offer some comfort, offer some love to those parts of ourselves. And in that way, come to better know who we are as individuals. I personally think so. Dworkin continues onward to more contemporary beliefs around grief, and highlights a book by Michael Colby. I'm going to say Michael Colby. Ikalamaya for the pronunciation. She turns to a book by Michael Colby called Grief, a Philosophical Guide. In it, Colby argues, quote, that grief constitutes a loss of personal identity, is entirely rational, and can even lead to self-knowledge. Now that's a spicy meatball that I can get behind. So it's kind of at this point in their essay that I pull out two main thematic questions that I believe can help guide a grieving process. The first of which is, For whom do we grieve? And what self-knowledge is there to gain through grief? Two very big questions that I think are essential to answer, right? It's like, who are we grieving, or what are we grieving? And what can we learn about ourselves through the process of grieving that, right? Through reading this essay, I kind of realized, and it kind of discusses as well in it, but we invest ourselves into the relationships that we have, right? The relationships that we build in our lives, whether we like those people or not, whether they're great relationships or not, we invest ourselves into them. So if or when these relationships fall away or are abruptly ended, or whatever circumstance leads to their conclusion, that late closing, we also lose parts of ourselves that existed in that relationship. And in addition to that, we lose the perception of ourselves through the lens of that connection. So when we lose that connection, within that loss, we lose part of ourselves. Yeah, that's kind of heavy, but I think profound. Additionally, through the process of grieving and feeling all of the emotions and pain of it, as Dworkin writes, quote, "Grief forces us to recalibrate the way in which we approach our lives. In grieving, we come to better know our practical identities and so better know ourselves. This process constitutes self-knowledge." In other words, through witnessing and processing the pain of grieving, we change the way we approach our lives. It's through this reevaluation that we come to better know ourselves. So that's some hard stuff to untangle, and a lot easier said than done. So before we do any of that, let's revisit our definition of grief with all this new juicy, scrumptious knowledge that we just gained from this essay. So this is what we said about grief, right? But after reading this essay, I think we can expand it a little bit. Using Colby's and Dworkin's ideas in tandem, I think a more specific and helpful definition for myself would be: grief is deep emotional distress caused by loss that can lead to a deeper sense of self-knowing. Of course, this is very non-academic, non-professional definition, but it feels right for me and for my intents and purposes of what grief work I need to do. I think it works. So now what? We have this definition, but what the hell do we do with it? Now that we know a little bit more about what grief is and we have a definition for it that can help us, we need to put these theories into action and actually grieve. To help me, I turn once more to the buke of the day, Nane Kekumu, Volume 1, Tutu Mary Governor Pukui, Queen of the Iwo Colonies Children's Center, and kind of discuss or kind of look through the discussions around death and grieving within Hawaiian society. On page 135, there's a description of ue and oli, so like wailing and chanting. And this Pacific, there we go. In this specific description on page 135, it's recounting the death of Kamehameha III Kauikeaoli. The sound of wailing rose and increased like the clamorous sound of the breaking waves. It beat upon the ears insistently and mournfully, like the reiterative strokes of the kapa stick. Kind of what I pull from this, right, is public grieving was normal. It was normative and widely accepted, especially for our ali'i, our chiefs, and our loved ones in the public sphere, but also in the private sphere, right? It's okay to mourn openly in public and not shut down your emotions, but meeting them exactly where they're at and putting on full display even as a way to release those emotions. And another practice accounted for on the next page there's a description of something called pa'i a uma. It is said, quote, usually 3 persons at a time took part. They would bring a mat with them and kneel down on it. Then, at the same time, they would clasp their hands behind their necks, then fling arms and hands up in the air, then bend over, slapping the chest and wailing loudly. Very energetic, very physically tolling practice. I think the thing that I'm pulling from this, though, is the community and collective aspects of grieving. It's not just one person doing this, it's 3 people doing this almost ritualistic practice of wailing, grieving openly. And there's something powerful about that collective grieving that happens. Another practice that's discussed too is this thing called kaniko, which is basically mele or songs written to honor the lives of someone that has passed away. These mele usually highlight the achievements of that person, what they were loved for, what they were known for, and why they will be missed. Truly just a beautiful way to honor their life. And I think this is found across cultures everywhere, right? With dirges and lamentations and the sort. Finally, there's a word that appears called ma neva neva, which isn't in Nanake Kumu, but looked it up on vehevehe.org. So if you're hip to that, if you're pili to that, you're a real one. But the word ma neva neva can also be translated to grief, but it also describes the kind of extreme actions of grieving that my kupuna practiced. It describes knocking out your teeth, cutting your hair into strange patterns, and tattooing the tongue. So kind of what I'm pulling from this word, ma neva neva, and the practices that it encompasses is the outward expression of grief, the physical representations of grieving that appear, right? They would tattoo their tongue, potentially, knock out their teeth, change their hair. And we also see this in a lot of cultures, right? I feel like a lot of people, when they go through a traumatic experience or something that like they didn't really end up well, right? Nasty breakup or whatever, buzzing that hair off. So it's the same type of practice. So now that we have the kind of this cultural grounding, or I kind of have this cultural grounding in what the kupuna did, I want these lessons to guide what my practice will be. And we'll see what that looks like. Quick note, I want to state here before continuing on, there are ancestral griefs and intergenerational traumas that literally cannot be healed until liberation. I'm specifically talking from the perspective of, as a native person that is queer and mahu. Kanaka Oiwi, native Hawaiians, experienced mass death, right? 95% of our population declined by the end of the 1800s due to westernization and the colonization of the islands. The criminalization of our culture and language, right? In 1896, literally the language of Olelo Hawaiʻi being banned from public schools, and the traumas that ensued after. The mass displacement of my peoples from our aina. The hypermilitarization of our islands, right? As part of this colonial, capitalist, imperialist project. And not even to mention the ongoing assimilation project that's happening still in these islands with the erasure of our peoples, and the co-optation of our culture to sell plane tickets and hotels. So what I'm getting at here is our grief work and trauma is still ongoing. There is no resolution until liberation happens, until we are practicing our sovereignty over our aina, over our vai. But what I'm aiming for in this specific video and context is to grieve a former version of myself. Okay, back to the video. Sorry, to hashtag bring back my healing process. I have found the sources of grief within myself and concluded that Kaliko, as I've known them, is dying or has died and needs to be laid to rest. And that's what happens, you know? And that's what life is. We live so many different lifetimes within a human life cycle. And that's where I'm at, is this version of myself is being laid to rest. I have a lot of appreciation for them and the people that made them who they are. But now there's a need for newness. So to properly grieve this kaliko, this version of myself that I've been for the past few years, I'm holding a funeral for myself, using the ʻike kupuna from the last chapter to kind of guide this process of bringing together loved ones and people I care about into one space to help me grieve. So it's like a chosen public. And I'm shaving my hair, which is wild because I've grown this hair since 2020, practically. I shaved it during COVID, and it's been growing back ever since, with a few, like, trims here and there. But, yeah, now it's time for a fully new version of myself. Here's a compilation of what the night was like.
Can you guys shut up?
I've had this hair for 6 years.
What are you gonna do with it after it hits the floor? Are you gonna do anything special with it?
I'm gonna collect it and then probably burn it in a ceremony.
Whoa. Whoa. Oh my god, so much. Come on,
That's like,
Susan.
it feels so heavy.
Do you feel a little bit lighter?
Like self-driving cars.
I tried to say this is throwing me back to when we were kids.
Yeah.
Nelly Furtado.
Another Furtado.
It wasn't a topic. It was very full circle. Yeah. Fort Lewis College in Colorado.
Marbar, you have to go.
We also have to record it. Sorry.
Is it that? That's so god. Yeah, but that's fire. So.
Yeah. I was soothed.
Get in there.
Oh, that shit's fucking hot. I did that way too long.
Here's our after.
Hi.
How do you feel?
I feel so much lighter. So much lighter. Physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. I'm so grateful for my loved ones. How's it going? I got too lazy. I'm recording the audio from the phone now, so sorry about the quality change. But aloha. It's been about 3 weeks since I shaved my head and bleached it, so you can see some growth coming back already. My family's been calling me Slim Shady or JT or making NSYNC jokes. But I love it. Yeah, it's been about 3 weeks, and within that time, I've traveled to and from Guahan with my partner to visit her family there, with the purpose of like her reconnecting with her culture, language, places. It was an incredibly beautiful experience that would be an entire video on itself. After coming back from Guahan and also being there for a little bit, I have a few reflections, but I think one of the main ones as it pertains to this video is I'm not entirely sure the fullness of what needs to be grieved, because I still feel that heaviness within me. That's the constant journey of learning and unlearning and processing and reprocessing that's required for healing. This video has helped me get another step forward, but there's so many more steps in this journey. Real quick, I'm just so grateful for all my friends that showed up to help me in this transition, to shave this hair. to help birth this next iteration of Kaliko. I definitely feel a lot lighter and more able to assert myself and feel more confident. But surprisingly, I feel more or less the same. This video's purpose was never to cross the finish line or find a solution to my traumas, but it did a really amazing job of sparking my curiosity and inspiring me to dive deeper. I'm left with more questions, more wonderings, more ceremony. Maybe my next video will have some more reflections, if I ever make it. For now, mahalo nui for joining me on this journey, hanging out, listening to my ramblings. I appreciate your ears and your time. Amama wanoa.